In 2023, a class action lawsuit exposed that one of America's most popular whiskey brands was selling mini bottles at gas stations that contained zero actual whiskey, not reduced whiskey, not diluted whiskey, none. Meanwhile, independent lab analysis has confirmed that darker spirits like bourbon and rye contain some of the highest levels of toxic congeners of any alcoholic beverage, chemical byproducts that metabolize into formaldehyde and formic acid inside your body. For anyone taking daily blood pressure medication or managing kidney function, those hidden compounds are compounding the exact problems you are trying to control. And for people who have trusted the same bottle on their shelf for 20 or 30 years, those toxins have been accumulating the entire time. In today's video, we are exposing 9 whiskey brands that betrayed your trust through deceptive labels, hidden ingredients, and dangerous shortcuts. Stay until the very end, because we will also reveal 2 brands that passed every test and a simple method to protect yourself at the liquor store that most people never learn. Coming in at number 9, we have Southern Comfort. The bottle with the plantation house on the label, the smooth, peachy spirit your uncle poured at every barbecue. The one that sat next to Jack Daniels and Jim Beam on the liquor store shelf like it belonged there. It never did. Southern Comfort is not whiskey. It has not been whiskey for most of its existence. When bartender Martin Wilkes Herron created the original recipe in New Orleans in 1874, he blended real bourbon with fruit and spices. But after Prohibition, the company quietly swapped the bourbon base for neutral grain spirit. That is vodka. For roughly 70 years, every person who bought Southern Comfort thinking they were buying whiskey was buying flavored vodka in a brown bottle. The Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau classifies Southern Comfort as a liqueur. Not a whiskey, not a bourbon, a liqueur. The same legal category as Kahlua and Bailey's. And it gets worse. Until 2016, the original 70-proof version contained just 21% alcohol by volume. That is nearly half the legal minimum required to be called whiskey. But the brand never corrected anyone. They marketed it as the spirit of New Orleans. They printed original whiskey flavor profile right on their materials. They let it sit on whiskey shelves in every liquor store in America for decades. 70 years of deception in a brown bottle. For anyone managing diabetes or watching sugar intake alongside daily medications, this liqueur is loaded with added sweeteners that never appeared on any label. Open the bottle. Smell that syrupy peach candy. That is not barrel aging, that is a chemistry lab. The Sazerac company bought the brand in 2016 and claims they put real whiskey back in. But the 30-proof and 42-proof versions sold at gas stations and grocery stores today are malt beverages. Same category as Mike's Hard Lemonade. Same shelf. Different lie. If the brand your family trusted for decades was never even whiskey, what are the budget brands hiding? Let's find out. Sliding into number 8, we have Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey, the little red bottle behind every bar. The shot college students take at parties and grandfathers sneak at tailgates. $100 million in annual sales built on cinnamon sugar and a fire-breathing dragon. Here is what the dragon is breathing. In 2014, Finland, Sweden, and Norway pulled Fireball from their shelves. The reason was propylene glycol, a chemical compound used in antifreeze, de-icing fluid, and pharmaceutical manufacturing. European regulators allow a maximum of 1 gram per kilogram. The American formula contained up to 50 times that amount. The FDA calls propylene glycol generally recognized as safe. Europe calls it a chemical that should not be in your drink at those levels. Fireball's parent company Sazerac shipped the wrong formula overseas. They called it a small recipe-related compliance issue. A substance used in antifreeze at 50 times the European limit is not a small issue, but the real betrayal came later. In January 2023, a class action lawsuit filed in Illinois revealed that the mini bottles of Fireball sold at gas stations and convenience stores across America contain no whiskey whatsoever. Zero. Those 99-cent shooters are malt beverages, the same category as beer. The labels are nearly identical to the real Fireball cinnamon whiskey bottles. The only difference is the word whiskey is missing from the front. In tiny text, the bottle reads malt beverage with natural whiskey and other flavors and caramel color. The lawsuit alleged that Sazerac intentionally designed the packaging to confuse consumers. They sold the illusion of whiskey without the whiskey inside. Pour one into a glass. That aggressive cinnamon hits your nose before the liquid settles. Too sweet, too artificial. The burn is not alcohol character. It is chemical heat masking cheap ingredients. For anyone on blood thinners or managing liver health, the hidden sugars and undisclosed additives in Fireball work against your body in ways the label never warns you about. You just saw what the cheap brands hide behind cartoon dragons and candy flavors. So surely the ones with frontier heritage and family stories are honest. Think again. Now at number 7, let's talk about Bulleit. The tall orange label, The word frontier stamped across every bottle. The rugged story of Tom Bulleit reviving his great-great-grandfather's bourbon recipe from the 1830s. It feels handcrafted. It feels authentic. It feels like a family pouring their history into every barrel. Much of it came from a factory in Indiana. Bulleit is owned by Diageo, a multinational spirits conglomerate worth over $70 billion. For years, Bulleit Rye was sourced entirely from MGP ingredients in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, a massive industrial distillery that supplies whiskey to over 50 different brands. The same liquid in your Bulleit bottle might be the same liquid in a dozen other bottles with different names, different stories, and different prices. An NBC News investigation found that many recognizable American whiskey brands source their product from this one massive wholesale distillery while marketing themselves as craft or artisanal. The terms small batch, craft, and handcrafted have no legal definition in the spirits industry. Brands are free to print those words on any bottle regardless of how or where the whiskey was actually made. Bulleit eventually opened its own distillery in Shelby County, Kentucky, but the brand built its entire reputation and customer base on whiskey it did not distill. The frontier story, the heritage, the great-great-grandfather's recipe, all of it sold on top of industrial liquid from Indiana. Hold the glass up to the light. Notice that consistent amber color, batch after batch, year after year. Real small batch whiskey shows variation. Factory whiskey shows uniformity. That's not craft. That's a production line, marketed as Frontier, produced on an assembly line. For people who paid $15 to $30 extra because they believed in the story, that money went to marketing, not to the whiskey. Drop a comment if you have a bottle of Bulleit in your cabinet right now. Let's see how many of us bought the Frontier story. Now listen, if any of this is making you uneasy about what is in your cabinet, good. That means you are paying attention. There is a way to tell the safe bottles from the dangerous ones, a simple method that most people never learn. We will break it all down at the very end of this video. Number 6 is one most people trust without question. Templeton Rye, the small-town Iowa whiskey. The one that told the story of a Prohibition-era recipe handed down through generations on a scrap of paper. The one that printed small batch and made in Iowa on every bottle while charging $35 because you believed you were getting something rare and handmade. You were not. In 2014, a Chicago man named Christopher McNair filed a class-action lawsuit after discovering that Templeton Rye was not made in Templeton, Iowa. It was distilled at the MGP factory in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, the same massive industrial facility that supplies dozens of other brands. The Prohibition-era recipe was not a secret family formula. According to reporting and court documents, the whiskey used a standard MGP rye mash bill with proprietary flavorings and water added in Iowa. Templeton settled the lawsuit for $2.5 million. They were forced to remove the words small batch and Prohibition-era recipe from the label. They were required to add distilled in Indiana to the back panel. $2.5 million. That is what it cost them to admit they had been misleading consumers since 2006. $35 a bottle. That is what loyal customers paid for a story about Iowa heritage and a family recipe that turned out to be industrial whiskey with flavoring packets. According to a Federal Trade Commission study, roughly 73% of consumers say origin claims heavily influence their purchasing decisions for food and spirits. Templeton knew that. They built their entire brand on it. Pour a glass and taste it. That sweetness that does not quite match barrel character. That slight artificiality underneath the spice. Those are not generations of tradition. Those are additives. For anyone on a fixed income who paid premium prices because the small batch label promised something special, you paid $35 for a $15 product wrapped in a better story. But that was a brand many people have never heard of. What about the names everyone knows? What about the brands sitting in almost every liquor cabinet in the country? Shows up at every holiday gathering, and shows up at every holiday gathering, and sits on every gift guide. Crown Royal is one of the most recognizable whiskey brands in the world, and Canadian whiskey law lets them put things in that bottle that American bourbon law never would. Under Canadian regulations, whiskey producers are permitted to add up to 9.09% of the final volume in additives. That can include sherry, wine, or other flavoring agents. None of this has to appear on the label. In American straight bourbon, the only permitted additive is water. No coloring, no flavoring, no blending agents, period. Crown Royal operates under a completely different standard, and most consumers have no idea. That signature smoothness, that approachable, almost sweet finish that made Crown Royal a gateway whiskey for millions of drinkers. Some of that character may come from undisclosed additives permitted under Canadian law. You will never find out from the bottle, because disclosure is not required. Pick up any Crown Royal bottle. Notice the ingredient list. There is not one. Canadian whiskey regulations do not require it. You are drinking a product where up to 9% of the contents can be something other than whiskey, and you have no legal right to know what that something is. For people managing blood sugar alongside heart medications, hidden sweeteners and flavoring agents interfere with the conditions you are already working to control. That velvet bag looks premium. What is inside may not match the presentation. 9% of an unlabeled mystery in every bottle. That is not premium. That is a loophole dressed in purple. If this helps you stay safer at the store, hit subscribe. It is free, and it means you will never miss these exposes. Of the Beam family name on the bottle. 2 generations of the Beam family name on the bottle. 200 years of trust. And a class action lawsuit that questioned everything the label promised. Jim Beam was hit with a consumer lawsuit over its use of the word handcrafted on the label. Plaintiffs allege the bourbon was mass-produced using modern industrial equipment, and that no reasonable consumer would consider the product handcrafted. Jim Beam produces roughly 10 million cases per year. That is over 70 million bottles annually rolling off production lines at massive facilities in Claremont and Boston, Kentucky. Handcrafted. At 70 million bottles a year. Walk through Jim Beam's operation and you will see column stills reaching multiple stories high, industrial fermentation tanks the size of swimming pools, and automated bottling lines running at hundreds of bottles per minute. This is not a craftsman hand-selecting barrels. This is a factory meeting global demand, and the flavored line makes it worse. Jim Beam Apple, Jim Beam Honey, Jim Beam Vanilla. These products contain added flavoring and sweeteners that transform straight bourbon into flavored whiskey, a category that permits the same coloring and blending agents that straight bourbon explicitly forbids. But they sit on the same shelf under the same family name. For anyone managing cholesterol or taking statins, the undisclosed sugars in flavored whiskey expressions compound liver strain at exactly the moment your medication is already taxing that organ. Pour Jim Beam White Label into a glass. Smell the sharp ethanol bite that overpowers the grain. Taste the thin body that disappears on the palate. 8 generations of a family name. One factory producing 70 million bottles. That is not craftsmanship. That is arithmetic. We are not done. The number 2 spot goes to a brand that spent millions in federal court defending one word on its label. Now I know this list is uncomfortable, but there are 2 whiskey brands that passed every single test we looked at. No hidden additives, no deceptive labels, no health red flags. We will reveal both of them, but only after we finish this countdown. Stick with me. Number 3 goes to Evan Williams. The Black Label, the budget bourbon that outsells nearly everything in its price range. Over 2 million cases a year at a price point that makes it the go-to pour for anyone watching their wallet. Here is the problem with whiskey that costs $8 a bottle. Someone has to cut corners somewhere. Evan Williams is produced by Heaven Hill Brands at one of the largest bourbon distilling operations in the world. The company controls over 1.9 million barrels of aging whiskey in Kentucky. That is an extraordinary amount of inventory managed on an industrial scale. In November 1996, a catastrophic fire destroyed several of Heaven Hill's rickhouses in Bardstown, Kentucky. Approximately 90,000 barrels of bourbon were lost. The fire was so intense it sent a river of burning whiskey flooding through the surrounding area. After the fire, Heaven Hill had to source bourbon from other distilleries to meet demand, including purchasing barrels from competitors. The quality fluctuated, the sourcing changed, the label stayed the same. But what about day-to-day quality? At $8 a bottle, the margin for quality control per unit is razor thin. Independent tasters consistently describe Evan Williams' Black Label as harsh, hot, and one-dimensional. Pour it neat. That immediate ethanol burn that hits before any flavor arrives. That grainy, rough finish that lingers unpleasantly. The thin mouthfeel that signals young whiskey that has not had time to develop complexity. Cheap bourbon is not just a budget choice. Darker spirits contain higher concentrations of congeners, toxic byproducts of fermentation, including methanol, which metabolizes into formaldehyde and formic acid in your body. A study published in the journal Alcoholism, Clinical and Experimental Research confirmed that beverages with higher congener content produce significantly worse hangovers and more severe toxic effects. For anyone already taking daily medication that taxes the liver, those congeners add a second layer of chemical processing your body has to fight through. $8 a bottle, and your liver pays the difference. Isn't it interesting how the biggest whiskey brands spend billions on advertising, but fight against ingredient transparency laws? What exactly don't they want you to read? See the pattern? Budget brands cut corners. Heritage brands hide behind family stories. Factory brands stamp handcrafted on 70 million bottles. So where does that leave the so-called premium labels? Let's find out. At number 2, we have Maker's Mark, the red wax seal, the handmade label printed on every single bottle, the warm Kentucky imagery of copper stills and rolling hills. Maker's Mark built an empire on one word, handmade. Then consumers took them to court over it. In 2014, multiple class action lawsuits were filed in California, Florida, and other states alleging that Maker's Mark deceived consumers by labeling its bourbon as handmade when the whiskey is produced through a highly mechanized manufacturing process. The plaintiffs claimed they paid premium prices believing they were getting something crafted by human hands, not industrial equipment. The courts ultimately sided with Maker's Mark, ruling that no reasonable consumer would interpret handmade literally. But the fact that the case went to federal court at all tells you something. The judge in the Florida case wrote that the plaintiffs alleged Maker's Mark sold their handmade whiskey with the false representation that the whiskey was handmade when in actuality the whiskey is made via a highly mechanized process devoid of human hands. The court dismissed the claims, calling handmade puffery, legally non-actionable marketing exaggeration. In other words, the court agreed the word was misleading, but ruled that you should have known better than to believe it. Handmade. On every bottle, in every commercial, on every billboard. A federal court called it puffery, and Maker's Mark kept printing it. Visit the distillery and you will see automated bottling lines, industrial column stills, and a production capacity that supplies millions of bottles per year globally. The famous red wax dip, that is done by hand. The whiskey is not. Pour it into a glass. That caramel sweetness arrives fast, almost too fast for a straight bourbon. Maker's Mark uses a wheat-forward mash bill that produces a softer profile, but that softness masks the industrial consistency underneath. Every bottle tastes exactly like the last because it is engineered to. For people managing blood pressure or on ACE inhibitors, even moderate whiskey consumption compounds dehydration and cardiovascular strain. When the label says handmade and a federal court calls that puffery, you deserve to know the difference. Handmade, legally meaningless, printed on every bottle anyway. But none of it, compares to what the #1 brand on this list has been doing. And it is a name almost every single one of you knows. Here it is. The #1 whiskey brand to avoid is Jack Daniel's. The square black bottle, the old #7 label. The best-selling whiskey on planet Earth, found in every liquor store, every airport, every holiday gift bag in America. 12.9 million cases sold in a single year, trusted by more people than any other whiskey brand in history. And behind that iconic black label is one of the most carefully constructed illusions in the spirits industry. Jack Daniel's markets itself as Tennessee whiskey, distinct from bourbon, implying a superior process. The Lincoln County process, where the spirit is filtered through sugar maple charcoal before aging, is the only legal difference. It does not make the whiskey safer. It does not remove additives. It is a filtering step that Jack Daniel's has turned into a multi-billion-dollar marketing distinction. Meanwhile, Russian food safety inspectors tested Jack Daniel's Tennessee honey and found what they described as chemical substances not common to whiskey. The inspectors also flagged the standard Tennessee whiskey for inadequate labeling, noting the complete absence of an ingredient list, a list of chemical components, or processing disclosures that Russian law requires. Jack Daniel's is owned by Brown-Forman, a corporation with annual revenues exceeding $4 billion. They could provide full ingredient transparency on every bottle. They choose not to, and the flavored line is where the real danger hides. Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey, Tennessee Apple, Tennessee Fire. These are not straight whiskey. They are liqueurs containing added sugars, artificial flavoring, and coloring agents that straight Tennessee whiskey would never permit. But they carry the Jack Daniel's name, the Jack Daniel's bottle shape, and the Jack Daniel's trust. A 2022 market study found that 47% of consumers who purchase flavored whiskey products believe they are buying actual whiskey with natural flavoring. They are not. They are buying liqueur marketed under a whiskey brand name. Pour Jack Daniel's Old No. 7 into a glass. That banana and caramel nose that has become iconic. Taste the thin, sweet profile that disappears into a short finish. For a product aged 4 to 7 years, the complexity is remarkably absent. Now smell the Tennessee honey, that cloying artificial sweetness that coats the tongue, that candy-like aroma that has nothing to do with actual honey or actual whiskey. For people managing type 2 diabetes alongside daily blood pressure or cholesterol medication, the hidden sugars in these flavored products directly spike blood glucose, while the alcohol compounds liver strain and dehydration. 12.9 million cases, $4 billion in revenue, zero ingredient disclosure. Jack Daniel's did not become the world's best-selling whiskey by making the best product. They became number one by making the best story. The Old Distillery, the Lynchburg folklore, the charcoal mellowing ritual. None of it changes what is in the bottle. And what is in the bottle, especially the flavored line, is a product that prioritizes your loyalty over your health. The most trusted name in whiskey. The least transparent label on the shelf. Now remember when I said there were two brands that actually passed every test? That got it right? Here they are. The first safe option is Wild Turkey 101. Master distiller Jimmy Russell has been at Wild Turkey for over 60 years. The bourbon is labeled Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, which under federal law means zero additives, zero coloring agents, zero artificial flavoring, only grain, water, and yeast. Aged in new charred American oak barrels. Bottled at 101 proof. Wild Turkey uses a low barrel entry proof, which means the whiskey goes into the barrel at a lower alcohol concentration than most competitors. This forces the spirit to extract more character from the wood naturally, without shortcuts. Pick up a glass. Smell that genuine vanilla, that deep caramel, that charred oak spice. None of it is engineered. All of it comes from the barrel. Taste the full body, the long finish, the complexity that budget brands cannot replicate. Wild Turkey does not need to hide behind marketing terms because the liquid speaks for itself. The second recommendation is New Riff Distilling out of Newport, Kentucky. Every single whiskey New Riff produces is bottled in bond. That is the highest legal quality standard in American spirits. Under the Bottled in Bond Act of 1897, the whiskey must be produced by one distiller at one distillery during one distilling season, aged at least 4 years in a federally bonded warehouse, and bottled at exactly 100 proof. No additives permitted. Period. But New Riff goes even further. They do not chill filter their whiskey. Chill filtration is a cosmetic process most distilleries use to remove fatty acids, so the whiskey stays clear when cold or mixed with ice. The problem is that process also strips flavor compounds. New Riff keeps every molecule of flavor intact. Open a bottle of New Riff bourbon. Smell the rich butterscotch and toasted grain. The aroma is deeper than anything you will get from the mass-produced brands on this list. Taste the full, layered palate, the warming spice, the honest barrel character that tells you exactly where this whiskey came from and how it was made. Here is the simple method to protect yourself at the liquor store. Look for 2 words on the label. Straight bourbon or straight rye means zero additives by law. Bottled in bond means government-supervised aging, single distillery, single season, and 100 proof with nothing added. If the label says whiskey without the word straight, additives up to 2.5% are legally permitted and never disclosed. If the label says flavored, it is no longer straight whiskey at all. If there is no age statement, you have no idea how old the spirit is. And if the marketing says handcrafted, small batch, or premium, and you cannot find straight or bottled in bond anywhere on the label, you are paying for advertising, not for whiskey. Earlier I told you there was a way to protect yourself. Now you know what to look for and what to walk right past. Subscribe now, and if you are watching on TV, tap your remote so you never get blindsided again.